Thank you, Tarek. And I'm also with the Vancouver Stop War Coalition and an editor at Rabble.ca. And it's been 2.5 years now since the Arab Spring. It really inspired the world, starting in Tunisia, and then the great movement of the Egyptian people. And there was 18 days of that revolution that brought down Mubarak, and hundreds, almost 1,000 people were murdered by the regime, the Mubarak regime, trying to hold power. And people fought a courageous struggle, first to gather in Tahrir Square, then to stay in Tahrir Square, violently attacked. The people defended themselves. They held the square and the right to be there, the right to be in the streets and protest. And then ultimately they forced the bringing down of Mubarak. But it came at a great cost. And it was the courage of the Egyptian people that I think inspired people all over the world. You remember Occupy Wall Street, and in Spain they had a movement called the Indignados that shook the squares of Spain to protest their government. All of that was inspired by Tahrir and by the Egyptian people. So this is part of a global movement. And in this difficult moment for Egypt, when so many hundreds of people are being gunned down by this regime trying to come back, right? What they're trying to do today is bring back Mubarakism without Mubarak. Now it's Sisi. It's a new face on the same evil and the same dictatorship. This is what they're trying to bring back. So I really believe that not just in Canada, but people in every corner of the world, we have a duty to stand with Egypt, to stand with the people's right to assemble, to be in the streets, to have protest camps, to demand their democracy, to demand their full human rights. Everyone, we owe it to the people of Egypt in this difficult time. This is, if we were so inspired and so excited and talking about a revolutionary movement 2 years ago, we have the same responsibility, maybe more responsibility, to condemn what is a counter-revolution today. This is a bloody counter-revolution, and there can be no excuse for the violence of the army, of the regime. It is a dictatorship trying to impose itself back onto Egypt. And I say this as someone with many political differences. I don't support the politics of the Muslim Brotherhood. Millions of people in Egypt don't support those politics, and they have their own vision of a future in Egypt. But think about here in Canada, where the government got less than 40% of the vote and formed a majority government. I couldn't be more opposed to the Harper government. I couldn't be more opposed to supporters of the Harper government. No matter those politics, you can never support the violation of civil liberties, the cold-blooded murder of hundreds and more thousands of people by a military regime to win the political fight. This is a disaster, and anyone in Egypt today who is supporting the bloodshed because they disagree with the Muslim Brotherhood is making a terrible, terrible mistake, and it's going to come back on them, because first they come for supporters of the ousted president who was elected. Let's remember, he was elected. He got the most votes. He had a right to form a government and to attempt democracy in Egypt. This is being taken away at great bloodshed today, and we all have a responsibility to support these democratic rights in Egypt. So I hope I make myself clear on that. And the best way for people all over the world to respond to this is to stand with the people being slaughtered and support the right of everyone in Egypt to be in the streets and to restore democracy. So I just wanted to give a few examples of a good response to what's happened in Egypt. There's 3 governments in Latin America have withdrawn their ambassador. They've taken their ambassador out of Egypt and cut relations. That's Bolivia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. Those are very left-wing governments, a different kind of politics than Morsi's presidency, but they understand democracy, and they understand the violence that's being carried out right now must be condemned by everyone. So that's what we need to see. On the other side, every vicious monarchy and regime in the Middle East is supporting the coup of General Sisi. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, even Syria, Assad, a different kind of politics there, but he's supporting this bloodshed. That should tell us something. And then we have Canada and the United States pretending that they're neutral. Canada is pretending that they condemn this violence, and yet, same with the United States, is pretending they condemn the violence. But every single day, those generals who are committing these massacres in Egypt are speaking on the phone to their counterparts in Egypt. They know what's going on. And the bullets that are killing people in Egypt are bullets sold by the United States or given by the United States, over $1 billion of military aid. And some of those arms are sold by Canada. Canada sells many weapons to the Egyptian regime, to the Saudi regime, and we should call for the Canadian government to cut all arms shipments to the Egyptian government, to the Saudi government, to the Bahraini regime. Canada should cut off all weapons sales to the Middle East now. And as mentioned, as Derrick has said very clearly, the Canadian government and everyone in Canada should take a clear stand for democracy, the restoration of democratic government in Egypt, and an end to this coup d'etat. It is a coup d'etat, and people should call this by its right name. And I want to finish there, and just for those listening who haven't followed the last week or so, or are not sure what's happening in Egypt, and you may have just come across this rally here today, please take a moment to talk to these many Egyptian Canadians here, many people with loved ones being killed and injured in Egypt. A Canadian resident from Toronto was murdered yesterday. A 24-year-old man was visiting Egypt for the summer with his 8-month-old baby and his new wife, and he was murdered by a sniper bullet in Alexandria, city of Egypt. So Canadians are dying, your neighbors are dying, friends and loved ones of your neighbors here in Canada are dying. Please take a minute, more than a minute, take a few minutes to talk to these people, to find out what's going on, and go onto the internet and look at some of the footage. It's brutal, it's hard to watch, but this is happening. People's lives are being taken away. People are being shot down in the streets just for protesting. So please make yourselves aware and then take action and speak to our friends here about how you can get involved and support the Egyptian people in their fight for democracy. We owe them all of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. About brave and courageous people who are today in the streets of Cairo, in the streets all across Egypt, standing up to this murderous military regime. They are heroes, they deserve our support, and they deserve our solidarity. We are shocked, we're saddened, and we're angered at the scale of the violence that Egypt's military and its international backers have unleashed against the Egyptian people since the coup d'etat of July 3rd. We demand that the governments in Canada, in the United States, in Europe, cease their political support to this regime, cease their military ties to the Egyptian military. We demand that they condemn the violations of democratic rights that are taking place in Egypt. We demand that they condemn the coup d'etat of July 3rd in Egypt. We demand that they support the return of legal and constitutional government and rule to Egypt. We also demand that the punitive measures against the Palestinian people in Gaza cease. They are suffering as a result of this military regime that is now restricting the flow of goods and of people into Gaza. And of course, we demand that Israel cease treating Gaza as some kind of open-air prison that they can bomb or cut off at will. Even today in Cairo, we're seeing the violence of this military regime not only continue, but even get worse, because we're now seeing the entry onto the scene more and more of vigilante squads. I call them fascist gangs. They're the plainclothes supporters of the military regime. They're also the provocateurs of the military regime who are probably behind many of the attacks on churches that you are reading about. This would not be the first time that Egypt's military would attack the Christian churches in the country and then blame it on their political opponents. So that's what we've seen today, and go to Al Jazeera, go to the other news broadcasters that are broadcasting live from Egypt, and they'll show you the stories of the vigilante squads that are going out and attacking the people that are protesting for democracy and against coup d'etat. It's a new stage in this offensive of the Egyptian military and the Egyptian economic elite against the people of that country. And many of the people that are attacking the opponents of the coup were the people who back in June were protesting against the government of President Morsi, saying they were for democracy. And I'm sad to say that this is the kind of democracy that many of these people involved in the June protests really wanted to see. Of course, there were other people who naively believed that if you overthrew an elected government and brought Egypt's military back into power, that somehow this could be improvement for the country. That's naivety. But there's also many people that were worse than naive. They were conniving, and they knew exactly that in opposing President Morsi, that they would bring the military back into power in Egypt. And we condemn that behavior. The overthrow of Mubarak, the dictator Mubarak, in February of 2011, went a long way to establishing democratic rights in Egypt. But we've seen those democratic rights overturned now. Of course, many people in Egypt have legitimate reasons to be critical of the government that was elected in 2012. Why not? It's a country like Canada that's going through great economic difficulty. It's one thing to protest the policies of a government. However, it's another thing entirely to call for the overthrow of that government by illegal and by unconstitutional means. And anyone who associated with such a call for the overthrow of an elected government were wrong, or worse, they were complicit in criminal acts. It's true that there's times when popular will must prevail over these very narrow and confined things that we call bourgeois elections. But that was not true in Egypt. It's said that President Morsi had 1 year to rule and he failed in his rule, therefore he had to go. That's nonsense. President Morsi was elected with a 4-year mandate. And what's more, the president and his government, they didn't have 1 year to govern and to improve Egypt. They didn't have 1 day, because the day after they were elected, Egypt's economic elite and its military began to sabotage the very functioning of the government. They sabotaged gasoline supplies and food supplies, so it could be blamed on the government. The police went on a kind of a strike so that criminal action and social disorder would have no policing. This is what went on during the year after President Morsi's election, for which he is supposed to have assumed the entire blame. So this was a conspiracy to overthrow an elected government in which many gullible people in Egypt, as well as to which they were blind. So today we're faced with a violent regime that seems to have no limits. And so we have to build a movement of solidarity with Egypt. Our struggle can't end tomorrow or next week, because sadly it looks like this military regime and its backers are not going to end their attack on democracy. And so we have to stand up for the people of Egypt, because in doing that we're standing up for democracy in Egypt, but we're also standing up for democracy in the world. If we allow these kind of violations of democracy that are going on in Egypt today to prevail, then it's a sad comment on us, it's a sad comment on the state of the world, and it means more of this could take place in other countries. So we all have a responsibility to stand. We have to build a movement of solidarity in this country and around the world. It's active, that's seeking out, that's mobilizing to put a stop to the assassins in Egypt, to put a stop to the support that the Egyptian military and its backers are getting, including from Canada. I want to close with a couple of words from Mona Al-Kazaz, who's a spokesperson for the Muslim Brotherhood in London. She spoke today to Al Jazeera News Network, and I want to just give you a few words from what she said. She said that we are returning to the Mubarak regime. We are seeing mass murder, the worst state-led violence in the history of Egypt. The international community cannot allow this to continue. She was asked, how long will the people of Egypt continue to fight for democracy? And she said, how long did it take Nelson Mandela to overcome apartheid in South Africa? It will take us as long as is necessary. We will not give in to this mafia. And finally, and these are the words I want to close with you here, we will remain defiant, we will remain peaceful, and we will take to the streets until the end of military rule in Egypt. Solidarity. Thank you very much. Thank you for